And it's the same thing in the Gospels when we're talking about Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday is in Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, and John chapter 12. I'm going to read it to you today out of Luke chapter 19. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I like that version of it. So if you have your Bibles, I'd like for you to turn to Luke chapter 19. And I want to read this to you, and I want to explain some things about this as we go. But we need to understand, I want you to have an understanding that when you leave here today, that Palm Sunday was just as important as Easter Sunday. There was a lot of things that happened. There was a lot of things that happened that week. Starting in verse 28. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. Now, history tells us that Jesus was in Bethlehem. From Bethlehem to Jerusalem is about 5 miles. Okay? 5 miles. Now, the thing that we don't really understand is that it's not just a 5-mile walk. It's 5 miles up a mountain. Okay? Because Bethlehem is at 1,200 feet below sea level, and Jerusalem is at 3,400 feet above sea level. So it's not just an afternoon stroll. It's a steep climb, and most of that climb is the last 2 miles, which is from Bethany up to Jerusalem. And so it's at this time of the year, the Passover, that history tells us that in the walls of Jerusalem, there's an estimated 1 million people. Okay? 1 million. So it's crowded. I mean, it's elbow to elbow. There's not a place to stay. There's not anywhere they can go. It is packed. People everywhere. So it's not as easy as just walking into town. There are lines everywhere. There are people standing everywhere. As he approached Bethphage, and that city is right next to Bethany, and Bethphage, listen to this, that name actually in Greek and Hebrew means house without fruit. House without fruit. And then Bethany, which is right next to it, the actual translation, the meaning of Bethany is poorhouse of depression and misery. How would you like to live in that town? Poorhouse of depression and misery. And so here's what we need to understand is that area is actually, it's outside of Jerusalem, and it's where all of the poor and downtrodden and those that are a little bit shady live. It's also where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, which I find it very interesting that my Jesus would go into a town that nobody wanted to go to minister to the needs of the people. That's the heart of our Savior. At the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt." Most translations say a donkey. Now, when I read the Bible, I have a very, very vivid imagination. You can ask my wife and my close friends. My good friend back there, Blaine and Jimmy, we hunt together, and I can shoot a doe, and by the time I get to camp, it's a 12-point buck. Okay. I mean, I can catch a perch, and by the time I get home, it's a 15-pound striper. And so I have this vivid imagination, and my wife says it's lying. I don't agree with that. But anyway, whenever I read the Bible, I imagine it's like a story. It's like I see it. I can see it, and I can put faces to it. And I was thinking about this as I was reading it, and it said that Jesus told two of his disciples, "Hey, go into town and get me a donkey." And as I was reading that, no kidding, as I was reading that, I was thinking I would tell Robbie and Matt to go into town and get me a donkey. And the reason for that is I know that they'd bring it back. They might have to steal it. They might have to borrow it. They might have to buy it. But I know that they're going to bring it back. So I know that Jesus sent two of his most trusted disciples into town and said, "Go get me a donkey." Listen to this. He says, "You'll find a colt tied there which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here." See, that tells me that Jesus was a cowboy. He wasn't no city boy. Ain't no city boy going to get on some donkey that's never been ridden. Long, anyways. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you why you're untying it, say the Lord needs it. Can I tell you why he chose a donkey? Because that was one of the questions that I had. Why would Jesus, he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he's fixing to make entry into Jerusalem to proclaim that he is the King of Kings. Now, typically when a king does that, they don't ride in on a donkey. Instead of that, they ride in the fanciest and the biggest chariot they can find that is pulled by the nicest and the best set of horses that are in the land, because they're representing the best. But do you know what a donkey represented? A donkey represented, and when I read this, it just blew my mind, and I just began to cry, because a donkey in that day, it represented peace and humility. And that's what our King of Kings, Jesus, was proclaiming that day, is that he is the Prince of Peace and of humility. He didn't come to dictate. You see, he gave us a free will. We can choose if we want to choose him or not choose him, because we have a free will. Our King of Kings, is not a dictator. He is a man of humility, integrity, and love that says you can do it your way, but if you'll do it my way, you'll see a way that's going to change you forever. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? I love this, because I love the way that Jesus is. He didn't offer up a bunch of excuses. He didn't make up some big long story as to why he needed it or where they were taking it. He said, if anybody asks you, you just tell them the Lord needs it. I kind of like that. So here's what we're going to do on Sunday mornings, okay? Y'all are going to bring all your money to the church. And I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do with it. I'm just going to say, the Lord needs it. Because essentially that's what happened. So they brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. And as they went along, people spread their cloaks. Now I want you to think about this. This happened for 5 miles. And the crowds grew larger and larger and larger as they walked in that parade with Jesus in the front on that donkey. And as they began to walk down the streets, people were throwing their cloaks and they were throwing palm branches in front of him. And the reason that they were throwing palm branches in front of him is because palm branches in the Old Testament, it represented this. Are you ready for this? Peace and victory. Peace and victory. Jesus is riding his donkey and they're headed into town. Now there's a couple of reasons why he rode into town and didn't walk. I want you to think about it. There's 1 million people there. If you're trying to walk through a crowd of 1 million people, no one is going to recognize you. But as he rode that donkey into town, the donkey began to separate the people, and they had to step out of the way so they wouldn't get stepped on by that little donkey. This is the only time outside of before the resurrection of Jesus, before the crucifixion of Jesus, this is the only time that Jesus truly wanted to be recognized because he knew what he was doing for you and I. So he rode that donkey into town. And he went, and when he came near the place where the road goes down to the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began to joyfully praise God in loud voices for all the miracles that they had seen him do. I read that and it just brought tears to my eyes. And the reason for it is that the same people that were praising him for all that he had already done are the same group of people that 5 days later were yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him." The same group. Kind of be like that best friend that you trust so much and that you love with all of your heart, and to your face they're singing your praises, and when you walk away they're stabbing you in the back. Jesus experienced that by thousands. They were singing, "Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna." The Greek translation for Hosanna is this: save us. Save us. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Listen to this. I love this. Oh, I love this. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, now this is the religious people. "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Do you know why they wanted him to rebuke the disciples? Because they were getting just a little bit too excited about Jesus. Hello. They were getting just a little bit too excited about the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so the religious people said, no, we can't do that. It might offend somebody. They might leave the church. Bye. Listen to what Jesus said. This is why I love this. He said, I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. It doesn't matter what the people do. Jesus was saying, I will be praised. So get over it. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it. Do you know why he wept over the city of Jerusalem? He wept because he knew that he would be rejected. And because he was rejected, that city would be destroyed over the next 40 years. And it was. And he said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming for you. God's timing. You see, here's what I want to share with you real quick. You know, most translations, when it talks about the colt or the donkey, it actually says ass. Okay? I can say that because it says it in the Bible. Okay? For you religious people. And so, as I wrote the title of my sermon, or at least the subtitle of this part of the sermon, without even thinking about it, I wrote, "Don't be a donkey." But I didn't say donkey. Actually, as I begin to study that, what I should say is this: we all should be a donkey. Every one of us. You see, that donkey did what it was designed to do. It carried a load. You say, well, why is that important? Well, let me tell you why it's important. God didn't call all of us in here to be worship leaders like Michael Howe. Okay? I've heard some of you sing. You probably ought to just be quiet. But listen to me. God didn't call all of us to be preachers. He didn't call all of us to be youth pastors or children's pastors. He didn't equip us to do that. There was a time in my life, because the Bible tells us that there will always be a seed time and a harvest, so there's always going to be seasons in our lives for different things to take place in our lives. I'll give you a prime example of that, and I'm not picking on Bob this morning. I'm praising Bob this morning. Bob Wiley, right there. That man, raise your hand. The old man with the glasses. Yeah. Listen to me. And I didn't ask him if I could say this, because he's one of those guys, if he gets mad at me, he just gets over it. Because the Bible said. But at a time in his life, that man was an amazing, noted, sought-after musician. Amazing. Played several different instruments. But as time began to take hold, his hands got to where that he couldn't do the same things. So did he just quit serving God? No, he didn't. Do you know what he did? He said, you know what? I can't do that anymore. It breaks my heart, but I'm okay with it because now I'm going to go work in the youth and I'm going to build relationships with a bunch of kids and I'm going to share Jesus with them every week. And that's what he does. He didn't get mad and complain and say, I'm leaving the church because I can't do this anymore. No. He said, God, what do you have for me? You know, I want you to think about that donkey. Now, he is tied up. There's no telling how long he'd been tied up. While all the other donkeys were out playing. While all the other donkeys were running up and down the streets with people on their backs and loads on their back, that donkey's tied up. He's just tied up. Never been ridden. That donkey was tied up. Waiting for his opportunity. All the other donkeys, as donkeys will do, were making fun of him. Oh, and they're talking behind his back. Oh, yeah, he's not good enough. He can't do the donkey things that we can do. Nobody wants him. Nobody's buying him. Nobody wants to use him. He's just an ugly donkey with big ears and a long nose. And then one day, two men came to town. And they said, hey, guess what, little donkey? Guess what you're fixing to do? You're fixing to carry the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords into the most important parade that there has ever been. Now, the donkey didn't say, well, I'm sorry, I can't do that because I've never done that before. He didn't say, I'm scared. He didn't say, I'm afraid. He didn't say, go find somebody else. The donkey said, I'll do it. I told you I have a vivid imagination. That's why I was a great children's pastor. There's some of you that are sitting out there today, and you've been complaining because you've been tied up. You've been complaining because you haven't had your opportunity. I didn't become a pastor until I was 52 years old, and I knew when I was 16 that I was going to do it. Well, Pastor, did you complain? You bet I did. A lot. Listen to me. We have to understand that God said that He knows the plans that He has for you. Plans with a hope and a future. God knows what the plans are for you and your life. Trust Him. Quit complaining. And enjoy being tied up. Because then when you start doing it, when you start being a pastor after you're 52 years old, and then you turn 62 and you're going, God, I want to go back to being a children's pastor. There's a lot more fun making kids throw up and laugh. Listen. But the most important thing that donkey did is something that I believe that God has called every one of us to do. And that's to carry the message of Jesus. Every one of us. We have over 30-something ministries that are represented from this church. In a couple of weeks, Steve and Kim and Harlan and Grace are going to Africa to go oversee the building of our school and our well. that you guys paid for. Now, not everybody's called to do that. I am not called to go to Africa. I'm telling you, I'm not. They've asked me numerous times, and I have lied sometimes and made excuses because I can't lie up here. It's, But it's like, no. I can't go there. I can't fly 400 hours in the air. I'm not designed for that. Listen, God wants you and I to carry the message of Jesus. There's 4 ways that we can do that. I'm going to go over them real quick. The first way is this. It's to pray. We need to pray. We need to pray that God will show us the things that we need to do. Now, we've got the biggest day of the year of churches coming up. The first biggest day is Easter. The second is Mother's Day. And both of those are coming up soon. Did you know that? Most people think it's Christmas. It's not. It's Mother's Day. More people go to church on Mother's Day than they do Christmas. Nobody goes to church on Father's Day. What does that tell you? Guys, bunch of heathens. Do we really have to go to church today? It's Father's Day. Can't we go fishing? And my wife tells me no every year. There'll be more people next week in this building than any other time. There'll be more people raise their hand to get saved next week than any other service that we ever have. This place will be packed. There's over 1,000 people that call this their church. They're going to be here on Mother's Day and they're going to be here on Easter. Okay? We got a nice new parking lot, almost. We got all the gravel just about out there. And a big shout out to Brian and Tate and Robert and Wes that came out here and worked so hard yesterday. I pulled up out here yesterday. They had 3 skid steers and a Packer out there running, and it made me a nervous wreck. I just knew they was going to run into each other, so I left. Not only do we have an Easter service, but God laid it on our heart this year. We're doing an Easter outreach. That's what God told us to do when we started this church, that we was going to be a church outside the walls. And so next Saturday, we're going to meet. And I'm telling you this because I would love for all of you to be there. We're going to have an outreach. We're going to have a big Easter egg hunt for the kids up to 6th grade. There's going to be tons of prizes and all that kind of stuff. We're going to cook hot dogs, and we're going to have a big shindig. We're taking the Stitches trailer, and we're going to preach, and we're going to share the gospel. And people are going to get saved. I promise you. It's going to be awesome. Now, we're not going to the big fancy new park. Okay? I want to make sure you understand that. We're not going to that one. We're going to the old park on the west side. Okay? That's where we're going. So you can be praying about that right now. You can be praying over the Easter service, the Easter outreach, over our staff here. It's a big responsibility next week because God has called us to do it. You can be praying over your friends and your loved ones and your coworkers. Do you know, I read some stats. I read a lot of stats because I find them interesting. Do you know that 7 in 10 people will go to church if they're just asked? 7 in 10. They're just waiting on somebody to ask them. 7 of 10 people that you know would go to church if you just ask them. Do you know what the stats are on Easter? 9.7 of the 10 people that you ask to go to church will go to church on Easter with you. So it's time for you and I to be the donkey and to carry the message. Even if it means picking up your phone and texting somebody and saying, hey, I'd love for you to go to church with me on Easter. Picking up the phone and calling them. Maybe just taking one of these cards and inviting someone, putting it in their hands, inviting them to come. We can pray. That's number one. Number two is invite. Invite your friends, your family, neighbors, co-workers through social media, text messages, handouts, phone calls, and in person. Invite them. The third thing is this: invest. I want you to think about that donkey. Now, Jesus wasn't no little man, okay? And he's on this donkey. And I can see that donkey just kind of walking along. And then all of a sudden he looks up. He says, we got to go up this hill. That donkey had to commit to that hill. He had to invest in it and say, I'm going to get to the top because I've got a job to do. We have a job to do. It's called reach the lost and train people to reach the lost. We have a job to do. Every Christian does. It's called the Great Commission. Not everybody's called to preach, but everybody's called to be a witness. Well, Pastor, I don't know how to tell somebody about Jesus. Just tell them your testimony. Do you know nobody can argue with that? Just tell them what Jesus did for you. It'll change their life. It'll change their life. You know, we had Myra Oliver here. If I would have just said, hey, Myra Oliver is going to be here on Saturday and she's going to be teaching about finances, nobody would come. But when I said, hey, Myra Oliver is going to be here, she was a hairdresser, and at 30 years old, she decided she didn't want to be poor anymore. And so by the time she was 37, she was a multi-millionaire because she learned about real estate and investing. This place was pretty packed out then. They wanted to hear her testimony. How'd that happen? It's the same thing in our walk with Jesus. The fourth thing is this. Guys, it's Easter. We need to be celebrating. I mean, next Sunday when you come in here, listen, my wife took me shopping yesterday because it's Easter. So we have to look good on Easter, right? Listen, I don't care if you wear your shorts and your tennis shoes next Sunday. You come in here with the attitude of we are celebrating the resurrection of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Kick off your high heels, run down to the front, and get your praise on. We need to celebrate. We ought to be excited about what God has done in our lives. I don't know about you. I was raised in church. Everything was supposed to be perfect. It was. As a little bitty boy, I had the impression in my mind that my life was going to be perfect because I went to a perfect church and I had perfect parents. My parents never abused me. I never saw my parents get drunk. I never even heard my mom or dad say a cuss word in my whole life. I don't know what happened to me. Or some of you. But man, what God has done in my life has been amazing. He's healed me numerous times. He has set me free. He has delivered me. And He saved me. And I've got something to celebrate about. And we need to be sharing that with everybody. You say, well, Pastor, I'm just not comfortable doing that. I want to tell you a story. I'm closing with this. I grew up in a musical family. We sang. We traveled and we sang. My mom could tear a piano up. My dad was an amazing singer. But they had it in their heads that I was going to play instruments and be good at it. Well, first of all, in order to be good at something, you got to like it. I didn't like the piano. And I didn't like going to piano lessons. And I sure didn't like practicing. So then my dad decides that I'm going to play the guitar. I'm 10 years old. So he goes out and buys me this really, really nice guitar, takes me to guitar lessons. I hated it. So one evening, I went to guitar lessons at this music store in Arlington, Texas on Collins Street. I'll never forget it. I was 10 or 11 years old. I think I was 10. And I got through with my music lesson and walked outside, and neither one of my parents were there. Imagine that. They were not perfect in that area of their life. So I'm sitting on this ledge, and this was in 1970, 71, the hippie movement. Long-haired, sandal-wearing, hip-hugger, bell-bottom, Jesus freaking, okay? And I'm sitting there, and here's these two guys, and they're walking down the sidewalk towards the music store. And I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but up until I was about 13 years old, I was one of the shyest kids in the world. And I didn't say a whole lot because I had a speech impediment. So I didn't talk a lot. And I'm sitting there minding my own business, and as they got closer, I could smell alcohol. They'd been drinking, and they were, I don't know, late teens, early 20s, long hair. Looked like they'd been living on the streets, and made me a little bit nervous. And they walked up and immediately began to pick on me. Oh, you got your guitar. You play the guitar? No, I'm just learning. Play us something. I don't really know how. You're going to play us something, or we're going to do da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You can fill in the blanks. So I opened up the guitar case, and I pulled it out. I only knew one song. And I only just knew how to play single strings. I didn't know any chords, and this is something I'd taught myself. And I played Jesus Loves Me on that guitar. And as I started playing that song, one of those hippies, I looked up and he had a tear rolling down his cheek. He told the other guy to leave. The other guy left, and he said, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have picked on you. He said, I remember hearing that song when I was in Sunday school years ago. I was 10. I said, yeah. He said, I haven't gone to church since then. He goes, I really haven't had any room for God in my life. I'll never forget him saying that because I could not understand that at 10. How do you not have room for God in your life? And I looked at him and I said, I said, can I ask you a question? He said, yes. I said, have you ever asked Jesus into your heart? He said, no. I said, would you like to do that? He said, yeah. And I prayed with him. His name was James Cantrell. I remember that. Because that was the first person I ever had the privilege of leading to Christ. I was 10. God gave me an opportunity. And from that point on, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. God, give me another opportunity. And that's my prayer for you this morning. Is that God will give you an opportunity to carry the message of Christ all over this world. Guys, God sent us to Wise County, Texas, America for a reason. To reach the lost. You might think you're here for a job. You might think that you're here because this is where you were born. You were brought here by God for a specific reason. God's got a plan. You're part of that plan. I'm going to ask you this morning to help us to reach as many people as we can for Jesus. Do the job of the donkey. Do what you've been called to do. Reach the lost. Would you bow your heads with me? If you're here this morning and you have never asked Jesus into your heart, and you'd like to do that today, would you raise your hand? We want to pray with you. You say, I've never done that. I don't know him. I don't know Jesus. But I want to know him today. Is there anybody? I see that hand. Is there anybody else? Maybe you're here and you'd say, you know, Pastor, I know that I'm born again, but boy, here lately I've gotten away from God. And I need to make things right between me and God. I need him back in my life.